am really pleased today to be here with Becky, and you're going to have to help me with your last name, Garrettson?
Garrettson, son
Okay,
of Garrett.
all
Yep.
right. She's actually the original starter of the Compassion Coalition. She started it in Alabama, and I was lucky enough to be there with her when she was sort of starting these activities. And I kind of took it over and asked her if it was okay if we go national with it. And she said, sure. But I wanted to talk to her about how come she started the Compassion Coalition, what her vision was, and just sort of her experiences. So can you tell us what motivated you to start the Compassion Coalition in Alabama?
Well, I want to just let you know I was actually not the one who started it, but Eagle Forum of Alabama kind of started the initiative to begin to pass a law. We wrote a law, and our general counsel, Margaret Clark, she came up with the idea of let's build a coalition of people to help get out the information about this issue and help bring those that are really struggling with it a safe place to come and get information. So Margaret really started kind of under the umbrella of Eagle Forum taking the lead, but has just built into a bunch of organizations that wanted to come together. So I'm grateful for her leadership. And then your leadership, kind of piggybacking off what was started in Alabama, you have helped just grow into something big that's nationwide. So thank you.
I'm actually excited because we now have some international people,
Wonderful.
organizations as well. So I'm excited about that. Some from Australia, Peru, Canada, England. So it's gone international
That
also.
is great.
So can you tell me about the legislation that you were working on?
Yes, we really saw a trend happening across the country where children without parental consent were allowed to begin getting puberty blockers and cross sex hormones, which we know would then lead up to surgery. And we felt, and the research shows, that this is long term damage. Children will be reliant on drugs for the rest of their lives. Even if they were to retransition, they're going to have a lot of health problems, and we wanted to be able to protect these children. We feel they are not mentally capable of making a big decision like this. Their brains are not developed enough, and all the research shows this, that they cannot see down the road like an adult can. And so we wanted to protect these children. So this law would prevent doctors or any other medical facilities to give cross-sex hormones, puberty blockers, or have any kind of surgery before the age of 18.
It's interesting that you mentioned that because I have been very aware of the impact of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones and surgeries. But one thing that I realized just yesterday is that most of these kids, if they go through a medical transition, they will be addicted to a drug one way or another. Because if they decide to detransition, their organs that usually produce their sex hormones are damaged. So either way, they're going to be dependent on hormones for the rest of their lives. And these are expensive.
They are. And even if they decide down the road 3 years after they've started their transition, or even a year later, that they want to detransition, they will live with those consequences. For example, many women who are doing these cross-sex hormones, within a month, their voice deepens. And when they go off those hormones, it doesn't change. It stays deep like that. And so they look like a woman, but as soon as they open their mouth, they sound like a man. And that can be very traumatizing them, and they will live with that for the rest of their lives.
Can you talk about some of the other long-term impacts of these interventions?
That's a good question. Well, I think the dependency on the drugs is such a big one, but not being able to have children. Once they have the surgeries, those procedures they're not reversible, and they will live with those consequences forever. I mean, these are huge decisions that have impacts that will last for decades. And then, the hard thing is, I feel like a lot of people that are dealing as young people that are dealing with the question of transitioning, they're really questioning who they are. So they go through the transition and then they realize that they've made a mistake. But for the rest of their lives, they will, because of what they've done to their bodies, they will carry the stigma around forever. And people will always look at them and wonder what they have done, because the things they've done are visible and unchangeable. So it's just a hard thing these people are going to have to deal with for the rest of their lives.
And a lot of them are damaging. A lot of, especially the surgeries, but the puberty blockers have tremendous long-term side effects. People talk about them being reversible, but they're not. The side effects are not reversible, and the cross-sex hormones have horrible influence on the body. And the surgeries, like you said, you can't reverse surgeries once they're done. Once those body parts are gone, they're gone. And your experience, I'm guessing, has been primarily talking to legislators about these issues. And could you just tell me, I'm curious, do most of the legislators you talk to know about this, what's going on, and how do you talk to them about it?
When all of this started for us, when we started researching, when Eagle Forum of Alabama began really researching what all of this entails and how big this problem really is, we developed the bill and began talking to legislators, and they had no idea that these things were happening in Alabama, that children as young as 8 years old were getting puberty blockers, healthy children. And as you know, Erin, a lot of these puberty blockers can make you very, very sick. And it gets worse when the cross-sex hormones come into play, but they had no idea. And I think that I'm happy that we were able to help shed the light on it. And we saw very little pushback, especially from the conservatives. It's a harder issue, I think, with Democrats. Not always, but we seem to get more of a pushback. And I think just the whole LGBT side of the spectrum seems to be more on the Democrat side. So they take a little more work, but there are plenty that see this as a health issue and jumped on board with us.
It's interesting to me, based on what I know about the Eagle Forum. I grew up as a liberal. I had a very liberal upbringing, and my impression of the Eagle Forum is that it's very much in support of parental rights. And so one of the things that I've heard about legislation like this is that you're taking away parents' rights. Can you address that?
How I think of this is that right now, this movement has taken the rights from parents. Parents are in charge of their children. It's their responsibility to keep them safe and healthy. And when they go around the parents and do these damaging things to children, that hurts the parents. That's against their rights. So this is definitely a something we need to draw attention to, because parents are the ones who are going to love those children more than anyone else. So it is definitely something that needs to have. We need to have these laws in place so that parents can stay in charge of their children.
Because there are cases now where parents are losing rights to their children. They're being charged with abuse or neglect, or even having their children taken away because they're unwilling to accept it when their daughter or their son says that they're born in the wrong body.
Right. It really is amazing. And children are being taken from their homes, taken away and put into foster care. And all of this is really based on a bunch of lies that are being told to children.
And parents, I think.
And parents, for sure. And they make parents feel terribly guilty if they don't follow what their young children want to do, then they're a bad parent. And I'll tell you, for those out there, you know, my 3-year-old grandson, he thinks he's Larry Boy on VeggieTales. And if I were to take everything that he says and just go with it, you know, how absurd is that? So parents know best.
What about the parents who say, "Hey, I want my kid to transition. I know they were born in the wrong body." How do you respond to them?
My answer to that is, if that's how you feel, and I know many parents feel this way, support them, love them, you know, get them into different kinds of therapy to help them understand why they feel that way. But then tell them they've got to put the brakes on until they're an adult. Help them understand that their brains truly aren't developed to think through this. And if they want to support them and as adults to make that decision, that's fine. But I think parents really need to see the dangers that these drugs cause. Keep them safe and support them until it's time for them to make that decision.
One of the things that I think a lot of parents don't realize is that the vast majority of children who have a trans identity will end up having that identity resolved if they're allowed to naturally progress through puberty. But if you put a child on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, that process gets stopped and they don't go through that process of puberty, which is it's actually healing to a lot of these kids. And I also think that a lot of parents don't realize that a trans identity can be a coping mechanism that is developed after a trauma or some other issue in childhood. Do you have any ideas about that?
Yes, and I think, Erin, probably the most important takeaway from this interview is to remind people that 98% of children that go through this, if they are allowed to go through natural puberty, this issue will resolve itself. I mean, 98%. So hang in there, parents, and just walk with your children, love them, help them with, there's some mental issues going on, help them with that. But just wait, because these things, the studies show, they will grow out of these if allowed to just go through puberty naturally.
Well, and one thing that, since I had gender dysphoria, I was a trans kid, I understand that that feeling of self-hatred, it's just an
Mm,
intense
mm.
feeling of self-hatred that trans kids have for their body. They hate their bodies. They want their bodies to change. And I think if parents thought about it in that respect, that this isn't about a kid being affirmed, this is about a kid being told they're born in the wrong body and the self hatred that they have for their body is appropriate. I can't imagine that most parents would actually really want to reinforce that idea in their kid.
That is one thing, Erin, you have been so good about is bringing out, since the first time I ever heard you months ago talking about this, is this really does confirm a hatred for oneself. And I think parents, it's important for them to see that this way. You know, their children were made, whether you want to think it or not, many of us think of it in the image of God. And it is the way, if you're not a God believer, you know, it's the way nature made. You are the way you are and embrace it. Um, but I think you're allowing that child to really enforce the hatred they have, which can spin them farther down the road.
Yeah, it seems like the good studies that I've seen about the long-term effects of medically transitioning a child are not good.
Right, right. And you know, what's really coming out so much, and especially we're seeing it in England, is the detransitioning that's happening and the regret that's happening. And our friend Walt Hillier, you know, is made done such a good job pointing this out. The more that people go into transition, the more we're seeing want to detransition. So we're just trying to help shout, you know, hold on, wait, grow through this, get counseling, because there are a lot of people that are really regretting this decision. And then they live with those terrible consequences for the rest of their lives.
And I'm wondering, I imagine that there are going to be a lot of lawsuits about this in the future. When I hear stories like one of the stories that I heard when I was in Alabama with you was Sydney, who's just this precious young woman who started transitioning and realized it was not the right choice. And now she has a lot of health effects, and her voice is now very deep, and she really regrets it. And she was told from the time she was 16 or 17 that she was born in the wrong body and encouraged to take these drugs that harmed her. And I'm not one who typically thinks that litigation is a good thing, but in this case, it might be what's needed.
Especially when they're given drugs right off the bat. Many of these stories, I know that you're familiar with this, are given puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones on their first appointment. They haven't taken the time to actually delve into why the child or the young adult is feeling the way they do. And I think so many times it is because of a trauma. It is because of family dynamics that can be a perceived problem within the family, or something truly wrong with the family. Those underlying things need to be examined first before ever going down the road to drugs.
So, as somebody who is, an activist, maybe a lobbyist, I'm not sure what you would define yourself as, but somebody who really cares about kids, how if somebody's watching this and they want to know what they can do, what would you suggest?
Well, first of all, I would want to tell them that they were not made wrong. They were not, there wasn't a mistake. And they are the gender they are, and they, encourage them to embrace that, and that they are a lovely person, warts and all. And to embrace that, and to get the help that they need to help them understand why they hate themselves so bad. They hate themselves so much that they have to change. Get to those underlying issues. And I would just want to encourage them that you don't have to hate yourself, and you are who you're supposed to be.
You know, what you
Let's
just
do
said,
it. Let's
what you just said really, it reminds me that I don't know about you, Becky, but as a woman, there are things that I'm not comfortable with about myself.
Absolutely.
In fact, I would say that 100% of women that I talk to have things about themselves they would like to change. It's
Yes.
really hard to feel 100% comfortable in your body. And I wonder how many of these young people actually know that.
That's such a good point. I wish I could tell every child out there, puberty stinks. Puberty is hard. It is not fun to start menstruating, getting cramps, getting moody, all of these things that are happening in your body, getting acne. I mean, we all went through it. All of us that are adults, we went there, and we feel your pain. But changing to the opposite sex isn't going to make it better. You're just going to have to grit your teeth and go through it, and know that you're going to come out on the other side, and it's going to be okay. For some reason, it seems like society wants to put on children, and I think social media is a big proponent, or one of the reasons why this is happening, is that you're supposed to have this happy, wonderful life all the time. You're supposed to have happy pictures on Facebook. Everything is wonderful. When you go through puberty, it is rough, and just hang in there. It's just part of life, and you're going to get through it. And you're going to feel so much better when you get on the other side. But still, as an adult, like you said, Erin, there are plenty of things about me as a woman that I don't like, that I'm insecure about. But I have just had to say, you know what? This is who I am. As much as I'd love to have a different body or a different, style, it is what it is. And so I'm just trying to embrace it and realize I'm not a mistake. I am the way I was made, and it's okay.
It seems so much healthier to tell children to embrace themselves, warts and all, than to say if there's something about yourself you don't like, you should change it either with medicine or surgery.
Right. And how does a child feel when they hate themselves so much, and then the parents say, I agree with you. You suck. You need to change so you can feel better. The parents are agreeing. How does that make the child feel? Instead of telling the child, no, you're right. You're made the way you're supposed to be. The parents are actually confirming, like you say, that hatred, which means the parents agree that something's not right with the child. That's not a good message to send.
Do you have conversion therapy bans in Alabama?
Not that I know of at this point, but we do know that when we wrote our bill, we brought in several therapists and counselors to advise us on this bill. And they are very nervous and concerned that there will be therapy bans. We're seeing that all across the country. And you're such a good advocate of why those bans are really horrible.
Well, and I think if the Equality Act it's passed through Congress, if it passes through Senate, it will actually require therapists to tell children that their self-hatred of themselves is appropriate and that they should transition. And that just, to me, is unbelievable.
It is. It's terrible.
So, Becky, as someone who's worked with legislators, how can people who want to advocate for children, who want to stop these medical treatments for kids, they're not even treatments, they're interventions. They're experimental, they've not been approved by the
Right.
FDA.
Right.
They cause incredible harms. So if somebody's wanting to help kids so that they are prevented from having these interventions, what can they do?
Well, I think going to the Compassion Coalition website is a great one. The Kelsey Coalition is wonderful, and there are all different kinds of resources that can be used. Not only do these resources help parents and children, but they are great resources for legislators. So you had asked me earlier, and I forgot to answer the question, how I talk to legislators. They have so many bills. If I'm talking about state legislators right at this point, they have hundreds of bills that are coming before them. They do not need a notebook full of information. You can give them one fact sheet that you can get from your website, the Compassion Coalition, or they can go to the Kelsey Coalition and pull off these great one pagers. That's enough information to open their eyes and get them to listen. And then they can go farther. But I would say, just give them little bits of information at a time. And it's enough to make them, realize, oh, there's something here I need to look into.
So where is your legislation now?
Well, it had passed. We were halfway there. It had actually made it through our Senate and was getting ready to come through the House, but the coronavirus came along, and so our legislative session has completely shut down. We will not be, which basically we're going to come back just to work on the budget. But other than that, all of the bills that were not passed this year are dead. And we will have to come back next year and start all over again. So we've had a good start, and this gives us more time to get ready for next year, but it also gives the opposition more time to fight back against us. So we're going to keep working, and I am hopeful, especially with health being so much on the forefront, I'm hoping that we will be able to show how this is a danger to health and be able to get it passed next year.
So in some ways it's a blessing because you now know what their arguments are going to be and you can come back stronger.
Right.
But it also means that there's a whole nother year that's going to go by where these children are not protected.
But it will also be a whole nother year of people detransitioning. More and more, the more time we have, the more detransition stories are coming out. So I think we can certainly use those to our advantage.
I don't know if you've heard about Kira Bell in England, but she's suing the National Health Service in England because she was put on puberty blockers as a child with very little counseling and then cross-sex hormones. And so it'll be really interesting. That's England, but it'll be interesting to see where that ends up. And maybe if legislators realize that they're putting doctors at risk of being sued, especially when now I think Medicaid pays for this in some places, this transitioning, and maybe insurance companies will see,
Yes.
oh, there's litigation happening. They might pull back from it.
Yes, and England has really been sort of the leader in this movement. I mean, they're the ones that, we saw a 2,000% increase just so quickly on this whole transgender movement. It seems we kind of seem to be following them. So I'm happy to see that lawsuit. We'll see what comes of it, but I think it will snowball over to America if it does get legs.
So if you could say one thing to our audience, it's going to be parents, children maybe who have transitioned, legislators, all kinds of people are going to be watching this. What is the one message, the take-home message you'd want to give them?
The take-home message is parents, love your children. Parents, your children were not made in the wrong body. Parents, allow your children to go through puberty, natural puberty with no puberty blocking cross-sex hormones. They will come out on the other side just fine. So just hang in there and love them and give them the mental health support that they need and help them to know they are not a mistake and they do not need to hate their bodies and you do not need to confirm that hatred.
That's a great message, Becky. Thank you.